Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is our community forum on threat assessment and internet safety. My name is John Besek. I'm the Director of Student Services for Wayne Westland Schools. And with me tonight presenting is JaCinda Sumara. Ms. Sumara is the Executive Director of Technology in the district. So kind of have a two-part presentation tonight. I'll start off and talk about the threat assessments. And then she'll follow that with some internet safety, some tips and advice. As Ms. Johnson had put in the chat at the start, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and we will answer them as we go along. And then there'll be some contact information from both of us that if you have questions after we're done, that you could contact us and we'll be happy to answer those. So let's just jump right in. Once again, my job is the Director of Student Services for the district, and a big part of that is just dealing with safety in the schools, safety in the community, working closely with our school resource officers in Wayne and Westland, and having a really good relationship with our court system, and just doing everything we can to make sure our staff, our students, and our community are as safe as possible. So the specific part of this this community forum tonight talks about threat assessments, and I just want to give you a little bit of background of what a threat assessment is. Maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, we had things in our district called risk assessments, and there were times when obviously students will either say things or write things or share things with others, and it can be construed as a risk or a threat. When we first started this process, it was kind of a open-ended thing where we would exclude the student from school for a period of time. We would convene a group of people who would then sit down with the students and with the parents, interview them, give them some testing, etc. And then after all was said and done, they would come back with a summary of the assessment and talk about what kind of threats the student posed, if any. So several years prior to even when we started this, they started this comprehensive school threat assessment guideline, which is called CSTAG. As it says, it was developed in 2001 and is an evidence-based model for schools to use in conducting threat assessments of students. Big departure from what we in Wayne Westland had used, but it designed that you're going to assess quickly, figure out what the needs of the students are, and also decide how much of a threat is what they have said and done is, so we can take the necessary precautions. Ms. Johnson, next slide, please. Thank you so much. One more. So again, with the CSTAG model, we identify students and situations that raise concern. And obviously, over the last 30 years, the things that you can say and do and bring to school have changed immensely. Things that when I was a youngster in school, we could do and it would never be a problem. But over, like I said, last 30 years, with things that have happened across the country, schools have become a lot more careful about what students say and deciding whether or not those situations are in fact a threat. So when it says we identify students in situations that raise concern, in our district, we have several methods that we identify these students. Obviously, we have real strong mental health in our mental health professionals in our district, school social workers. We have psychologists, we have counselors. Our teachers and students have very close relationships where students are comfortable talking to their teachers. We also have OK to Say, which is a anonymous kind of a thing where students can call an anonymous tip line and provide information, and then they come back. The OK to Say will come back to the school or come back to me and say we have a tip that needs to be investigated. So identifying the students in the situation is key right there. So it involves students who are listening carefully, they know their friends, and they know things that go on that either they see that shouldn't be happening or they feel, that's an important part too, they feel could be a problem as well. So once those things are raised, then the school then gathers information and facts to assess the risk of violence. And gathering information and facts, as the CSTAG model has shown us, it can't be something that takes days, can't be something that takes weeks. It has to be an immediate kind of a thing. So when when a threat arises and then we're made aware of that threat, we have like a quick timeline that says we need to interview people who heard it. We need to interview people who might have been around this student. We need to interview parents, friends, etc., and just check on the validity of that risk of violence. And then once we determine if there is a risk, or even if there's not a risk, develop an intervention and management strategy to support students and prevent violence. So in many cases, it could be someone who just said something who's frustrated. It could be someone who's in a classroom, frustrated with a teacher, frustrated with a friend, and they make some comments, an offhand comment, which as adults, many's the time where we say something that, it might sound violent if you don't know the context. So if it's someone who's struggling in a classroom or struggling with interpersonal skills, that becomes our job then to address that and, maybe establish better relationships for that student with whoever they're having the problem with. As I said, our mental health professionals in the district do a really good job of identifying these things, and then also setting up groups or individual work with these students to kind of get over some of the issues that they have. Next slide, Ms. Johnson. So nationwide, say 86% of students receiving CSTAG assessments were able to return to school, which means that when we go through these, I don't want to call them tests, or when they go through the questioning process, we're finding that nationwide, 86% of any threatening statements that are made are not truly, meant to be threatening, which I think is, pretty important to note. Prior to us using the CSTAG model, we probably had, I would say, maybe 50% or more of our students who were excluded from school for more than 3 days as we went through our process of evaluating them. Next slide, Ms. Johnson. Once we started using the CSTAG model in Wayne Westland, over 90% of students receiving the assessments were able to return to school. Obviously, as most people know, this year, student attendance and erasing truancy is a big focus of not only Wayne Westland schools, but schools across the state and schools across the country. In a situation where a student is making threats, or a student is making, is either telling someone or drawing things, or, we want to make sure they're safe, and we want to make sure that we identify quickly, how serious the threat is. So make sure that they are staying in school. In many cases, the support that the school can offer is far better than anything they can get outside of school. So as long as the students are deemed to be safe and not a threat to others, we keep them in school, provide them supports. So once we started our CSTAG, we were trained at Wayne County RESA. And what we did through our superintendent, Dr. Dignan, he strongly felt that every building needed a team that was trained in the CSTAG model. So we had 2 training dates where we went over for all-day training. It was conducted through the 2022-2023 school year. In every building, there was one administrator, a school social worker, and a psychologist that were trained along with some of our counselors. And the district has been using this assessment for over a year now. And as I mentioned, it's far better than anything that we've used in the past. Excuse me. So in this model, the CSTAG model, and there's 2 things that are really going on right now. There's the CSTAG that's out there, and there's another one that was developed by the United States Secret Service, which is very, very similar. The names are different. The process is virtually the same. So in any case, when there's a threat, we use something called the CSTAG screener. And it involves interviews the student who made the threat, the individual to whom the threat is made, and students and staff members who may have heard the threat. And when we're talking about that, it could be bus driver, it could be a cafeteria worker, it could be somebody in the hallway, could be another teacher. We identify as quickly as possible anybody who has any knowledge of the threat or the statement or whatever the student says. And we use the team that's together, in the building, and then kind of go out as fast as we can, interview the people who are pertinent to this conversation, come back together, and then discuss exactly what happened, what the findings are. And that second bullet there is important there. The screener is completed. If you go back, Ms. Johnson, there's a One more. Screener is completed as close to when the threat was made as possible. If you were going to the old process where we waited, a week or perhaps 2 weeks to interview students who made these threats or students who heard them, you realize that, students and their memories over a course of a period of time are going to get weaker and weaker. So that's why it says the screener is completed as close to when the threat was made as possible. Next slide, please. And again, the CSTAG screener is meant to collect as much information as possible, determine the credibility of the threat, provide support and/or consequences, and ensure the safety of students and staff. We're going to see that a lot tonight, that ensure the safety of students and staff. That is the top priority in this district, is to make sure students and staff are safe. And again, collecting as much information as possible. It's going to be a quick process, but we're not going to cut corners in while we're doing it. So talk to as many people as possible. Again, talk to anybody who could have had any contact with the student when they made these statements. Ms. Johnson, can you go back again to those bullets that were just writing in the previous slide? Determining the credibility of the threat too. Many parents have said this and are, as times go on, where it could be frustrated at home. And, I've said things, threatening to perhaps even like my dog or something. And that's what we're talking about, credibility. If I say something out of anger, out of frustration, it's one thing. If I say something that's very specific in what I will do and how I will carry out a threat, then the credibility goes up exponentially. So we want to make sure that when we're looking to get as much information as possible, we make sure that it's accurate information and the stories line up, and one person's not saying one thing and one person's not saying another. Providing support and/or consequences, that's another important part as well. Go back again, Ms. Johnson, I'm sorry. Providing support or consequences. In many cases, there will be a consequence. Maybe it could be some after-school detention, or loss of some privilege, or based on what grade level it is. There could be a consequence for making these statements, but the more important part of that is providing support. We are in the student business, we're in the people business, so we want to make sure that if someone's struggling, I mentioned this earlier, if someone's struggling, we want to make sure that we are providing the support for that struggling student. And again, in many cases, it could be just something that's set out of frustration. So if we can find what those barriers are, break them down, establish good relationships, chances are those things aren't going to be said in the future. And again, ensuring the safety of students and staff. I don't think there's a school district in this country right now who doesn't have that as their top priority and one of their missions. Next slide, please, Ms. Johnson. So when we're doing the CSTAG screener, at the end, when the teams talk to all these people and they talk to all witnesses or anyone who might have knowledge of this particular threat, they sit down as a group, and the group is 3, sometimes 4 or 5 people. They sit down as a group and objectively talk about what they found, what the interviewees mentioned, what evidence they've seen, and then they may make a determination, a transient threat versus a substantive threat. So I believe next slide would be helpful here, Ms. Johnson. Transient threat is a statement made in frustration or anger. If you are a parent, if you have brothers and sisters, many of the time, I'll be honest with you, I've wished ill on my sisters because I've been frustrated with something, and things that will come out of my mouth sometimes are not very kind. However, they know, because of the relationship we have, that it's not something that they need to be taking seriously. So a statement made in frustration or anger could be deemed as a transient threat. It should say no intent to harm anyone else. And many times it's just students playing around. They'll banter back and forth and they'll start saying something. And you know how students sometimes they'll say one thing and their friend feels that was nasty, but they need to trump that being nasty and say something worse. And it's just students playing around, and then they become, a little bit more aggressive in what they're saying. Just as a note, students playing around as a building principal, I would say that at least 65 to 70% of all issues that happen to buildings started off by students who said we were just playing around, and it just escalates from there, and it becomes either a physical thing or something where it becomes you know, where it just needs a little bit more intervention. So students playing around is always a key one. A substantive threat, however, is a verified threat with intent to harm self or others. And that's key right there, the intent to harm self or others. It can result in police involvement. And in our district, we are lucky to have two excellent school resource officers. We have Officer D'Amico, who works the Westland Police Department side of it, and the Westland schools. And we have Officer Sermon, who is our Wayne School Resource Officer. He works at Wayne Memorial and takes care of our Wayne schools. So whenever there's a threat like this, we might ask them to do a wellness check in a house. If a student mentions something about having a weapon at home, an unsecured weapon, or anything of that nature, we will ask our school resource officers to do a wellness check and to stop in and ask the parents questions like, do you have weapons in the home? Are they secured weapons? Can we look and make sure that they are secure? And we're lucky because 99% of our parents are like, please come in, check for yourself. You know, we want to show that we do have weapons and they're locked up and there's no way for our sons and daughters to get them, and they're very compliant. So we're very thankful for that. So if we're going back to that part about, with intent to harm self or others, in some cases, the students may need to be cleared by a mental health professional, an outside mental health care professional, prior to re-entry. We might have them go to a local hospital or some others. Many times they're seeing a therapist already, and we will stipulate and say that we will need some kind of clearance from that mental health professional that says you are not a threat to harm self or others. And then at that point, we will do a re-entry meeting and have them come back to school. It's really important for just to know that the letters that we get from our mental health care professionals are they say things like, as of this date, after this examination, this student is not a threat to harm self or others, and that's totally okay. We will accept that as a re-entry tool to get them back in the building. And again, that re-entry meeting with the building administration, the healthcare team, mental health care team in the building is going to be key, because we want to make sure that person has somebody to talk to, that we touch base with them on a daily basis, just to make sure that they're feeling good and they're ready to come back to school. They don't feel, so alone. And as many of you know, we do use Care Solace. That is a group of people that is we can use them. We partner with them, and they will help parents get mental health for their children, for themselves. It's one of the best things we've seen in the district, and we can help parents with referrals to that, get them hooked up with people. Care Solace does all the work of scheduling meetings, finding mental health professionals, and then parents have very little to do outside of just attending the meeting. So they'll do virtual meetings, they'll do in-person meetings. It's a great resource that we have in this district. Ms. Johnson, I'm going to answer that at the end, if that's okay with you. So let's see, where are we? Supports and re-entry. Okay. So as I said, when the students are ready to re-enter the building, we want to make sure that our school social workers, our psychologists, perhaps there's a mentor that we would link this student up with. We might have a check-in and check-out program with that student. But again, it's just to make sure that student has these touch points throughout the day. Relationships in the building. I think that we've seen studies in the past that said if there's one adult in the building that your student feels comfortable with, that can make all the difference in the world, because many times they will share information or they'll share feelings with that adult. So it's important that someone's identified and makes an effort to go and check in with that person on a daily basis. And that reentry meeting that we have, it identifies how the supports will be delivered. We tell the parent, this is what we're going to have in place. This is what it's going to look like. And to be very honest with you, sometimes if students make a threat with they say things like, well, I'm going to bring a weapon or something. In the reentry meeting, we might stipulate that, for the next 2 weeks, we might have your backpack searched in the morning. We might have your pockets searched in the morning. And we do that again to make sure our staff and our students are safe. And as a school, we have that right to do that with any student to examine or search their belongings. And we just want to make sure that everybody is safe. Next slide, please. And again, can't say this enough, the safety of our students and staff is our top priority. And, you know, we do have some excellent supports in this district. I've never seen a district with this many social workers, psychologists. The relationship that we have with our local police departments is better than any I've ever seen in the school system. And Dr. Dignan and the executive cabinet, you know, make sure that we maintain that relationship, and it's a really good two-way communication. And even with our local courts right now, we're doing things with our truancy that we have them involved too. So you talk about a partnership with the local community, and that's what we have in Wayne Westland. It's really one of the things that I think we're most proud of. What's the next slide, Ms. Johnson? It could be going on. Oh, good. For more information, that's my contact information right there. But let me jump into the chat because I think there was a couple questions in there. Are parents notified when a threat assessment is conducted on a student? Absolutely. The only thing is that it always depends on how fast we notify parents. So we want to make sure that we get the people who are involved interviewed quickly. So the threat assessment might be in the middle of it, and then we'll call the parent as well. But many parents say, well, I don't want my student to be, you know, being interviewed by police or by other adults unless I'm there. Schools have a right to do that. The schools have a right to talk to students during an investigation. But parents are always, you know, welcome to be apprised of the situation. Parents have the opportunity to come in and ask their own questions and, you know, just be aware of what's going on. But again, then they'll be notified, of course, when it's done. They'll talk about the reentry process, any consequences, and it's a partnership between the school and the parents. And we just want to make sure that everybody is safe and everybody gets the help and the support that they need. All right, let's see what else we got here. Can parents request a threat assessment on their child if they think there is a risk or a threat and aren't sure of what to do? Absolutely. Actually, there's something that happened like that today with a student who was just enrolling, and the parent said something about, you know, did there have to be a threat in the school before we do the threat assessment? Absolutely not. It's, you know, the way it's set up, it's a more of an open-ended question kind of a thing where the student gets to talk about all kinds of things. And if the team determines that there is something there, whether it's a threat or a need for mental health care, it's a great way to identify that. So yeah, if there's ever a question that, you know, you might want to have your child have that assessment, it's a question of giving the school a call and saying, can you please you know, do a threat assessment and give a little background to just like, you know, why you feel that, what you might you know, how you came to that decision. They might ask you, you know, are there weapons in the home? Are there, you know, does your child make statements in the past? Does he get in trouble with other people in the building, or just all kinds of questions? But I think we'd rather do that than wait for something else to happen in the building where we're doing it in a more, you know, quicker kind of timetable. All right, so that part is the threat assessment part. And now Ms. Sumara, I believe, will have the next part on internet safety.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Besek. Hello again, my name is JaCinda Sumara, and I serve our community as your Executive Director of Technology and Innovation. And today we're going to talk about internet safety, and really internet safety for our students is all about parent-school collaboration. We can work together to really support our students in being safe, developing healthy habits, and this really can occur in a few different ways. But really, what's really at the core of being successful in keeping our students safe is that we are proactive and that we establish strong communication with the students. Next slide. So internet risks really fit into 4 categories. I have a continuum here that sort of shows from least invasive to most invasive. And essentially the categories of internet risks are around content, cyberbullying, scam, and online predators. Inappropriate content it would just be something that might be anything from something that might be age appropriate to something that could be truly offensive or mal-informed. Cyberbullying is essentially come about because of social media, where students can engage in two-way communication, or just humans in general can engage in two-way communication. And because you can hide behind, or there's an opinion that you possibly can hide behind a screen, people might feel safe to attack someone else. Scamming is a large internet risk. Typically, we all know of emails that are sent kind of trying to get personal information, but more and more, these scams are getting to be very elaborate. They come in a variety of ways. They're sent to students and people and via text, embedded into their social media threads, and again, still in email. So we have to be real savvy to make sure we don't fall prey to scams. And of course, there are still online predators who are very skilled in doing dangerous things to people. So what can we do really as the adults that are around these children? Our number one thing we can do is really model appropriate behavior, and having passwords that are safe, that prevent access to content that might be inappropriate for them. Teaching our students about how to develop strong passwords themselves, attending to how we process e-notifications. Are we, content is always popping up on your phones, on your computer, on that. Every time something pops up, are we shifting our behavior to the digital, or are we staying engaged with the students that we're serving? That is, our students pick up on that behavior, and they will replicate what they're seeing. We need to be considerate about what we're talking about when we read online. So when we read online, we really need to put on that lens of the lens where we're really trying to figure out, is this valid? Is this reliable? And being careful that if we do discuss something that we read online, that we attend and comment on how we determine that it is an authentic piece of information. And then thinking that share button that is so tempting to so many of us for a variety of reasons, whether it just be something funny or something that we think other people might connect with, but just being cognizant that before we share, we think about, why are we sharing this? Who are we sharing it with? And what the impact of that sharing behavior might be. So again, as we started at the beginning, this is a school family collaboration on making sure our students are safe. So as school, we have control on our school devices. And I'm going to be very clear. That is our school devices. There we go. And so for all of our school Chromebooks and school iPads, we have software in place that really does manage their online access. And this is even broken down by grade level. Our elementary students do not have the same access that our secondary students have. We monitor online activities. We are currently going through an activity within the Department of Technology where we are assessing every single application that is deployed. We're reading through the ethical use policies of those programs and determining what age they are appropriate for, and then only allowing them to go through those. I think to this point, I think we are through almost 300 different applications that are used around the district. So we're really putting a lot of thought into that. We are restricting access to inappropriate content, especially if there is a use policy that has an age restriction. We are following those recommendations on everything that we do share with our students. And of course, the location of devices in our environment is really important. There's a reason the devices that we have selected for student devices are big enough to be seen, because then we're aware of where those devices are when they're in the classroom, so students aren't, and that allows us to see the device and to also see what's on the device. Parents can do the exact same thing. Back one slide, please. Parents can do the exact same thing that we are doing as a school district. While we're controlling what's on those school devices, it's really the adult control of personal devices that's really going to ensure that we have that wraparound safety around our kids. Many of our platforms that are available in the commercial market do have parental controls that allow adults to manage the online access for their students, to monitor the online activities of their students, to restrict access to inappropriate content. And of course, as the adults, we can decide where those devices live in our homes. Next slide. So some school policy and practices that we have in place to support those 4 topics that I just talked about. For school policy, we are in alignment with the Child Internet Protection Act. That is a requirement for schools to follow essentially everything that is outlined in there. And that whole act is about keeping our kids safe in a digital environment. Our acceptable use policy outlines for students and for staff what we think is an appropriate use inside of our space. And if a student chooses to act outside of that, or a staff member chooses to act outside of that, there are conversations and sometimes redirection that is implemented to ensure that we're not compromising the safety of individuals within our environment. We have actually purchased something called Lightspeed, and Lightspeed is a suite of technology that's available to support our kids and our students and the adults in our space and being safe. Lightspeed allows us to filter content. It allows us to manage the classroom. So when a teacher has all their Chromebooks up in the class, they can actually see what's on every screen in their classroom at the exact same time, which is a really nice feature to, for a variety of reasons, whether it be to just sort of watch how the student's working, to sort of get some visible thinking about how they're working, all the way to making sure that they're safe. This suite of software also has a system called Alert, and this is one that Mr. Besek is probably the most familiar with. Alert actually, when a student does a search for content, if they do search for something that might provide insight that the student is perhaps in need of a threat assessment, this will essentially ping counselors and leaders within buildings to let them know, like, hey, go check on this student. And then they can assess whether they need to do the full threat assessment. And then finally, digital insights. We're able to actually keep track of where our students are, what they're doing, how much they're using different software or different applications, to really gauge what's going on with that student. And this can be really insightful from everything from just understanding what resources our students are really connecting with and what's really supporting their learning, all the way to maybe what's distracting our students and preventing them from learning. And that allows us to, make decisions around what we should have available and what we should perhaps filter and block. And finally, my department is in the process of creating a full process on how to report incidents and concerns to us about things that slip through through the cracks. So this will be a form that will be stood up in our new help desk system, and it will make it easy for students, staff, and the adults that support our students to report any incidents or concerns right to our department for immediate response. So family policy is a little different than school policy. Essentially, your family policy is really going to depend on your adult attitudes and beliefs around technology. There is a lot of research about how adult knowledge and awareness impacts what children in the household are able to do inside of their house. And of course, adult knowledge of the devices and technology that's in their home, or your digital literacy, really will impact the choices that you make. And if you are struggling to make those choices, I encourage you to reach out to my department or to other families that share similar beliefs, to gain some understanding from them on how you approach creating that family policy about what you allow access to for your students on their personal devices. So as our students get older, it has to move from just protecting them and not allowing them to make those decisions to actually helping them become digital citizens that have the ability to determine whether or not the environment that they're in is safe and appropriate. So we do direct instruction on responsible online behavior. Some of this is included in education development planning. Other parts of it are included in some of the character education programs that are happening in the district. But essentially, the key to this is that just like in real life, in the digital world, we want to respect others and yourself, that we want to practice hygiene. This way, in this case, cyber hygiene attends to not necessarily your cleanliness, but how clean is your digital record? We especially talk about this with our high schoolers who are starting to put together their packages for wherever they're intending to go for their post-secondary opportunity, that what you post on the internet goes with you. So how do we keep that appropriate for anybody who may do a search for you as they're determining if you're the right fit for their post-secondary option? And of course, to be critical consumers of online information. How do we not fall prey to scams? How do we protect ourselves from some of these some of the risks that are out there for us to fall prey to? And this is truly at the core and in alignment with so much of the Wayne Westland work around making sure that our students are future ready. And I believe in utmost an essential component of college and career readiness. I encourage everybody to continue to stay engaged with their kids, especially as they start to grow up and are seeking that independence. Staying engaged with the students' online activity lessens their risk. Continuing to monitor their online behavior, even though they're an older student, sometimes is a challenging thing, but it's important. And the way to really approach this is to really communicate openly with your students about the concerns that you might have. That open communication is the research says that the best way to keep our students safe in the digital environment is to have open opportunities for our students to communicate about what's happening in their digital world, and for us to do it in a for us to receive it in a non-judgmental way that allows them to stay safe. So if your student does come to you to have a conversation, these are some tips that I have for you to stay calm. They might be nervous when they come to you, and they're going to really how they react is really going to be based on our demeanor. So it's really important for us to stay calm, for us to stay balanced and non-judgmental while they're giving us information. They're basically revealing and engaging with you. And if you jump to judgment or you too quickly try to solve problems, it may close that conversation down quicker than necessary, and you may not get everything that you need to completely communicate with the students. And finally, this one is a challenging one because especially as adults that have, students in our homes, we always want to think that we're the number one person that they come to talk to. But in this case, because digital world is so different, it's really important that we identify to the students in our homes who they can talk to about things like this if if they don't feel comfortable talking to you. To reiterate what Mr. Besek said at the beginning of this presentation, the safety of our students and staff is our top priority. I think about this every day. It is probably the number one thing that I think about as we deploy technology through our district is, are we doing this in a way that is safe and supports our students and our staff in their growth? Again, my name is JaCinda Sumara, and I serve as your Executive Director of Tech and Innovation, and my contact information is here. And feel free to reach out to me at any time that works for you.
Ms. Sumara, I wanted to kind of touch base on something as well, just the Lightspeed system that we use. I think it's important for students and parents to note that this is a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week thing that it's monitored. So it's good and bad. So when there's certain things that if a student types in, it'll alert a list of people, and I'm always on this list. So for a English class that's learning about like the story To Kill a Mockingbird, students might be writing something about this, and their first couple words are in the story To Kill a Mockingbird. To kill right away is a one of those things that's a red flag to Lightspeed. So there could be days where I get 60 or 70 emails from Lightspeed that say students are typing things that are questionable. But there's also a secondary thing. It happened with Romeo and Juliet too, I believe, because it's also like they're talking about suicidal tendencies. So someone might be doing some research on suicide, and again, it's a red flag for Lightspeed. But the other part, the excellent part about this is I've had calls in the middle of the night, whether it's a weekday, weekend, where they'll say there's something that came up where a student is talking about self-harm. And in those situations, it's, they'll alert me. I will call our school resource officers, who will then alert the local police department, and the police department will go and do a wellness check. And they've done this in the middle of the night before, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. Then while that's going on, I will call the building principal, I will call the superintendent, and let the executive cabinet know as well. But again, it goes back to that whole thing of we want to make sure our kids are safe. And it doesn't matter if it's, school day, weekend, after hours, whatever it's going to be, and the good thing is, I think maybe we've had maybe less than a dozen of these over the last couple of years where we've had a wellness check in the middle of the night. I've never encountered a parent who has come back and say, why did you do that? They're always very thankful that we checked. And in some cases, we could have averted something that could have been potentially really bad. So the other thing is, we do that, and you might get a call from your principal, like after hours. It's sometimes easier hearing from the building principal first, as opposed to the local police department, director of student services, or someone at central office, because you have that relationship with them. So again, that when we talk about the safety and of students and staff as the priority, as a building principal, I would tell my parents that all the time. I say, I treat your kids like I treat my own, and I sincerely meant that, where I would do anything in my power to make sure those kids are safe. And it's not something we just say, it's something that I think we practice from the top on down. in this district.
You know, Mr. Besek, one thing, having been a recent principal in one of our buildings, I was, for those of you who are not aware, I was the principal of William D. Ford Career Tech Center. We did have a few hits while students were in our building, maybe searching for something, we have health occupations programs that might be searching some of those things. But what I really appreciated was, if a student in our building got a hit, it also notified their home school. And it was really apparent how much wraparound support we have because we would get a call from a counselor, a social worker, different people, and we would also know in our building. So it's working, because we would know to go and do a quick check with that student to really understand what's happening in that learning space.
It's funny because I think, with the middle, we tell everybody obviously that these different programs are in place and we're going to be monitoring what they're typing, what they're searching for. But it always seems to be those middle school students who always push it a little bit. So, at the start of the year, if I get these alerts and I'll see somebody typing something or doing a search or making comments about a teacher, during class, I'll pick up the phone, call into that classroom and say, you need to check on this student right now because they're typing these things. And all of a sudden the students realize we're not messing around. I mean, we're making sure people are safe, making sure they're on task. And as Ms. Sumara said, this, our technology department does a really good job of providing all these, provide the technology devices, et cetera, but we're going to make sure people are using them properly. And if they're not, there's obviously consequences. So I believe any questions? I see we talked about the parents and can they request a threat? And I believe, let's see, I think that's all the questions we have right there. So if there's no more questions, first of all, I think I'd like to thank everybody for showing up tonight. It's a topic, obviously, I'm glad I spoke first. Ms. Sumara is way smarter than I am. She sounds way more intelligent. So that's why we start with the age before beauty. But anyway, so if there's any questions that come up, our contact information is in there. You are always free to give us a call, email, talk to your building principal, the administration, and or central office, and we can answer any question that you may have. So if there's nothing else, please, thank you. Thanks for joining us tonight and have a great evening.